All right, it is patch notes time for Total War Warhammer 2 with the Total WAAAGH update. Now, a lot of these patch notes we've gone through in their respective videos, such as the major overhaul to the greenskins, so we're not going to be covering that in this video. I'll link into the upper right corner so you can at least see them in action. Same thing here with the High Elves. We've gone over a lot of these changes that have happened to the High Elves as well, and a lot of these quality of life fixes. We'll go over real quick though, because these we didn't get a chance to talk about entirely. So, right set spawn agents, such as the Pestilent Scheme and the Incantation of Petra, now spawn the agent at the faction leader rather than the capital, which is really, really nice. That's been a cumbersome thing since the beginning, because some of those things are different depending on which it is. Healing effects now display their total healing value versus just like saying it heals you. Fast forward option now remembers its state between end turns, and preset unit colors given to lords and heroes actually retains on the campaign map and not just the battle map. Also, Confederate lords will now skip directly to the final stage of their quest chains. So if you confederate and you now grab a legendary lord and it has, let's just say, the Talisman of Hoeth, then that is going to jump all the way to the end of their quest, rather than you having to deal with all the each and every steps of it, which I can't be. That's an amazing change, because it was such a cumbersome thing when you wanted to really, play a gotta catch 'em all with your specific faction to try and catch up all the legendary lords. Doing their quest battles was always such a pain. Now, we've gotten a lot of Moral Empire map updates with some new provinces, such as the Marshes of Madness, with 2 new regions, Floating Village and Morgheim. The Strigos Empire has relocated to the new Marshes of Madness as well. Carrick Asgal has been burned to the ground by the great dragon Grog the Terrible, and now starts the campaign abandoned, and Carrick 8 Peaks is now a 10-slot settlement, which is kind of nice here. Some new factions: Clan Vulcan, Ferric, Spittle, and Creepus, as well as the dwarf clan of Helheim, and in the absence of its former rotund master, the Skullcrag tribe now claimed Misty Mountain as their capital. So, some little tweaking there with some new clans added in, some new landmarks with the Fortress of WAAAGH. This is, of course, where Imric starts. Darkhold in the Graves of the Dragons. Graves of the Dragons in the Darkhold, right next to Fortress of WAAAGH. City of Bronze in Kasabar, and of course there are plenty more that were added. If you want to see what ones were added, please go over to Lore Master of Sotek's channel. He covered all of them, and I think one of his actual first videos of the embargo lifting. So you can see all those really cool, fun new additions to the campaign map. Now, as we move down here, we have all the balance changes for the High Elves, which again we did cover in a video linked in the upper right corner now. And we'll go over to this part. So there's a number of other little kind of tweaks that happened. So the Guttering White's Crackle Fruit skill no longer replaces Bomb Throw. You can have both. Miners with blasting charges now count as melee units instead of missile units for bonuses. Blood Voyage armies now receive army-wide frenzy. And this is also covered in that video, but if Harganeth is an AI faction, only the Lord of a Blood Voyage army will be unbreakable, not the entire army. In the past, again, it was the entire army, and it made it so cumbersome to deal with the Blood Voyage in the latter portions of your Alariel campaigns. So this has kind of been reworked here. Channeling Stance, as well as Blessing of Lilith, now requires less movement to enter. And here's a real cool one. Ungram no longer grants 30% casualty replenishment for slayers in his army. This has been replaced by a unique passive, Journey's End, which prevents slayers from dying until they lose at least 50% of their HP. So you get to actually hold on to the entities, the actual models for your slayers when you're playing Ungram up until 50%. So I think this is a pretty cool way to take this whole Ungram Iron Fist lore and give it a really nice twist in a way that's a little bit different than what we get typically with just a simple, upkeep reduction or casualty replenishment bonuses or so on and so forth. I like this as a possible twist, and I hope to see this for more lords in the future that actually gives them a bit more flavor that pertains to their respective units or their focuses. And a little bit of a nerf here with the Ravenous expansion skill for Skaven. It's been reduced faction-wide settlement income from 20% to 40% and 2% to 4%. So a little bit of a chop in half on that. But a big amount of battle balance changes with a lot of big sweeping things to a lot of stuff. So, contact effects and friendly fire. Stop me if you've heard this one before. You've recruited a fresh-faced group of chameleon skinks to support your SAR's push. The line clashes and the skinks start volleying the enemy. Then you realize you've poisoned your own troops. Again. Poison and other contact effects on ranged weapons have long been a double-edged sword. Friendly fire meant you could poison your own troops just as readily as the enemy's, leaving you with a zero-sum result. With this update, friendly fire will still cause damage, but will never inflict debilitating contact effects on your own units. This is really nice when you want to reduce all the many contact effects that you get from ranged abilities. You're not going to be applying those to your units anymore. This is especially deadly when you're dealing with contact effects that reduce your shield parry or your armor. So nice little fix there. So Strider has had an entirely big overhaul. Now it applies to everyone and not just the simple. It used to say, okay, if you here it is. Unit ignores force penalties if it is large and water penalties if it's small. It's not like that anymore. Unit ignores terrain inflicted stat penalties. End. Units aren't slowed down by hills and other slopes. Units don't take a penalty for fighting uphill. Units don't tire quicker when moving up slopes, and units can pass through trees. Now, there's a new one called Woodsman attribute, which is from the 8th edition Warhammer Fantasy book for the High Elves, and that just now applies to these characters. White Lions, Alistair, Marcus Wolfhart, Huntsman Generals, and also an Amber Wizard. So we get a kind of a variation of it for them. Now, Shudder has also been applied to a number of other characters, or units. Direwolves, pretty much any kind of wolf-based unit, it's now there. Mortis Engine now gets it, the Death Runners, Eshin Triads, Eshin Assassins, Master Assassins, Snikch, and also Eshin Sorcerers. So, you see a bit of a motif repeating in that one. Now, another one is on the animations for volley and burst fire weapons. So this is, in the past, if it got interrupted, they would just lose their ammunition. That is no longer going to be the case. So, for example, this was especially punishing for units like warp fire throwers and rattling guns. This will no longer happen. They'll continue to retain that ammunition since it was not expelled. This mainly affects Skaven. As you can see, a lot of these have there's a lot of Skaven on this list, but there are plenty of ranged units as this was happening to. Splash damage also kind of had itself retweaked a little bit as well. Essentially, it was causing single entities to take double damage from splash damage, and that's not going to be the case anymore. Also, the second bug was that attack animations with multiple splash attack zones would do multiplicative damage in correlation with the number of splash zones. That has now been fixed. So, what that tells me is that mortars should not do as much damage. They should do their intended amount of damage. So, a unit which deals 100 damage but has 2 splash zones could deal up to 200 damage, 100 for each zone. This has now been altered in order to mitigate the extra damage provided from additional splash zones. Each subsequent splash zone now has diminishing returns by dealing less damage than the previous one. So again, mortars are going to get a little bit of a shot in the gut here on this one, but hopefully should be able to bring their damage in line, and we'll see how that kind of pans itself out. A number of campaign fixes, a number of them. Upkeep penalty is now updated correctly when disbanding the first recruited army, which is nice here. Teleport to quest battle now correctly can be used from the events panel. Let me see here. Character rank up button will now correctly open skills tab in the character details panel. Sword of Cain now displays the correct values for its diplomatic penalties in all situations. Dilemmas will now update correctly when influence changes as they are triggered, and the High Elf Ancillary Advisor to the King can now be correctly assigned to any High Elf Lord. Intricate Court dropdowns will no longer have text extending outside of them. Nice little kind of fix up there. And this one's cool. Lord Master of Hoeth can now equip arcane items, which I'm not sure. It makes it look like it was a bug, but it definitely probably just wasn't working as intended. Black Ark Admirals can now gain traits and the Sword of Cain, which is pretty spicy. Bloated Corpse has Terror to match the bullet point. There can only be one Chief Doomclaw. I'm just trying to pick out some of the bigger ones that I remember. Oh, the Brass Orb. Black Hole Flares now have access to the Brass Orb ability in campaign, which is going to be pretty deadly. And Red Crested Skink Chiefs no longer lose all their attrition immunities when mounted on an Ancient Stegodon, which is nice there. I didn't even know that was a thing. Vampire Lore of Shadowcasters now gain bonuses from corruption effects, leadership. Norskin characters will no longer use the updated Warhammer 2 character traits. Oh, we're now used. Sorry, I was like, that's not good. Unique items in a mortuary cult panel no longer state that they are repeatable. Interesting. And Grail relics no longer count as war machines. Awakening the Wood skill has a spell ability on its tooltip, and armies can no longer clip into the mountains of Bedrock Island. An electric count tooltip will no longer cut off in multiple languages. There was another one for Volkmar I wanted to look at here. There we go. Volkmar no longer has a hidden 75% discount on Elector units. So if you were using that, it just got cut off at the heels right there. So there's been also a number of changes here to a lot of the battle changes. Ammo counts will now take into account burst size. Artillery engines based missile damage is now being modified correctly. Death Guard no longer dismember. That must be a typo. That shouldn't happen. Malicious transition into Zarkan is now visually smoother. Empire Archers and Deathjacks now have different textures to distinguish them from one another. High Elf Dragon mounts, Lothern Sea Guard, and Phoenix Guard units now have faction colors. So a lot of like little tweaks here and there. Multiplayer has had a little bit of a tweaking as well. Players can no longer use campaign exclusive units in custom or multiplayer battles using the unit cap option. Loading a multiplayer save game will no longer show the host faction name as blank on the client screen. So just a nice little quality of life. But the big one is always the unit balancing. This affects so much stuff from the multiplayer to the campaign. Now, usually I put this into a Word doc to show you guys the coloring of like, hey, this is what was nerfed and this is what was not nerfed. By not nerfed, I mean buffed. But they've changed their format here, so it's a little bit more tedious. So I'm just going to kind of go through this together with you guys and just kind of highlight things as I kind of talk about them. We've had a lot of unit name adjustments. For example, Chariot is now all Chariots. Visual improvements coming of Grom has prompted the Alistair the White Lion to wield a flashy new axe that he actually had the entire time, but simply didn't want to tell anyone about. So that was kind of suppressed, it seems like. And we've gotten a lot of the Regiments of Renown have had their stats tweaked to reflect what a base unit at rank 9 would be, not just simply the Regiment of Renown. So for example, Rusty Airs went from morale 45 to 50. So this has kind of been a sweeping change across the board for a number of Regiments of Renown. But the Beastmen, they have gotten some cost decreases across the board with their Razor Gore units, Chariots from 1100 to 1000, the Herds from 55 up to 600. Also, Minotaurs with shields have their melee defense brought from 46 now to 45, and Butchers of Kalkengark get that same reduction. Bretonnia now has a bit of a change here as well. Increase in melee defense from 37 to 38 for your questing knights. That is again going to go over to the companions of Quenelle, who have also got a cost increase by 50 up to 1550. The Green Knight dropped in cost down to 1800. Pegasus Knights got their melee attack increased to 34 by 2, which is pretty nice. And anti-large up by 2. So hopefully we'll start to see Pegasus Knights a little bit more now because they've gotten a nice little increase in their attack and at large. Dark Elves, also, it looks like a lot of things got like a little tweaking on their category style, but Scourge Runner Chariots and Coldwind Chariots can no longer hide in forests. But the Ravagers of Rakarth had their reload reduction reduced from 30 to 10. It's a pretty drastic change there. Also, we have the Scourge Runner Chariots added both units to the units with 360-degree fire arc cap. Scissors of Slaughter decreased melee defense from 59 to 57. The Slaneshers of Harvester got a cost increase as well. The Dark Shards cost was reduced. The Bloodrock Medusa's melee attack was increased by a whopping 4. The Siren of Red Ruin gets that same increase there, but actually by 5. Now, Malekith mounted on Seraphon gets a drop in his physical resistance down to 15%. And Charybdis increased from health from 9458 to 10,400 with a cost decrease as well by 100 points. Witch Elves on the Cauldron of Blood also got a bit of a rework here. Riders can now use corrupted weapon profiles, so their daggers will no longer deal the same damage as the vehicle does when ramming into enemies. So the big thing here to kind of take a look at with the Dark Elves is there's definitely been a bit of a nerfing in the things that we see so much in multiplayer. Scissors of Slaughter, something we see a lot of, and they just have their melee defense kind of cut down a little bit. The Nesh's Harvesters, another thing we see tons of, just got their cost increased. Malekith himself, always being used on Seraphon, well, depending on the matchup actually dropped by 5% of his physical resistance. So a lot of these things are going to be tweaked a little bit, and hopefully we're going to see some more Bloodwrack Medusas with their melee attack increase, although they're not really, their focus point isn't being in melee, it's ranged. But still, Charybdis itself might get a little bit more of a resurgence here with its cost decrease and its HP increase as well. Dwarfs, we get a little bit of a tweaking as well. Cost decrease from 1350 to 1300 on flame cannons. Rangers with great weapons get a nice increase to their ammunition, which is a good amount too. A nice 4 additional volleys here. Gyro bombers added contact effect suppressed to projectiles. They'll be able to slow things down with their projectiles, which is cool. Increased missile projectile explosion radius from 1 to 2. That was one thing that it looks like I skimmed over here. Warp lightning got its explosion radius reduced from 6 meters to 5. That just reminded me of it. In fact, actually, did we go? Yeah, I jumped ahead, my bad. But still, there's going to be a lot of those really heavy punishing damage effects have had their radius reduced a little bit to kind of hopefully bring them in line, which I'm all for. Warp lightning was just way too powerful. White lightning, we're talking about a car here. So as we jump back on over to our Dwarfs Gyro Bomber. Okay, so Skyhammer here, same exact thing. So some pretty cool little tweaks there. Not a lot of changes, but some nice buffs here and there. Empire, Griffin's attack meta data reworked to make Griffins more effective against large groups of enemies. I mean, they're going to do better splash damage basically with their attacks. Empire General just got a cost reduction to 800. Demogryph Knights now have their own unit category. Boris Togbringer was gained innate ability Blood Roar on his Imperial Griffin. Crossbowmen, Hellstorm Rocket Battery, and the Volley Gun all had their costs reduced by about 50 or 25 depending on the unit. Reichsguard just got their melee defense increased by 1. War Wagons as well are getting a nice base missile damage from 3 to 5 and AP missile damage from 15 to 25 because they were really lackluster before, to be totally honest. Luminarch of Haish just got an increase in both its armor and HP, reflected into the Templehof Luminarch. Now, the Greenskins, all Lord characters have 150 cost increase now that WAAAGH has been built into the faction and no longer needs to be taken as a separate ability. So this is going to kind of be across the entire board here. Black Orc's colors are overridden for all factions so that the unit appears more lore friendly. Garsnik and Night Goblin war bosses now have Vanguard deployment by default, and Grimgor Ironhide has an increased entity size. He looks girthy. Skarsnik, it was increased speed from 34 to 35, melee defense from 110 to 115, and AP missile damage from 275 to 300. WAAAGH himself got a little bit of a buff there from 24 to 32, a whopping 8 melee defense when he's on Skull Muncher, which is quite nice. The Arachnarok Spider lost some armor from 150 to 120, but gained a ton of HP from 9100 to 10,000. And also some good melee attack by 4 to up to 58. This is reflected also in the Ragnarok Queen. We got Night Goblin Fanatics, got a cost increase by 50, and then their archers got a cost increase by 50 as well. Then the 8 Peak Loonies get that same cost increase. The Night Goblin Squid Hoppers get some nice bonuses for the melee attack by 2, and the Deaf Creepers also get a cost decrease from 650 to 600. Same thing here with the Goblin Wolf Rider Moon Regiment of Renown by 25. And the Doom Diver got a nice cost increase from 950 to 1,000. So an interesting tweak there with a lot of those costs, because we're going to start seeing hopefully some of those Regiment Renowns a little bit more, maybe. I mean, kind of a little lackluster. But a slight increase to cost on the Doom Diver so they can't be used as easily. 1,000 points, a little bit more intensive in a 13,000 or 12,500 point or 12,400 point game. Orc Boys have had their armor increased to 65. So Orc Boar Boys, my bad. Same thing with the Savage Orc Boar Boys up to 35 as well. The Biggins had an increase in their armor up to 85. And the Broken Tusk Mob also gets that same bonus because it's a Regiment of Renown. Now for the High Elves here, everything on the High Elf, pretty much the Noble and the Mage and the Ithamar Chariot all have gotten a retweak to their metadata zones, where basically the unit was attacking incorrectly in an incorrect location. So now this has been fixed. So that should be a little bit more representative of the unit itself. Also in battle, these units are now a new variation of the chariot model, and that as banners moved over to the side in order to prevent the mounted characters from clipping into it. Well, good. Looks a little bit nicer, a little bit cleaner. So things shouldn't be, they shouldn't be able to attack ahead of their actual model. Was the actual issue there. So all the high elf mages have gained all of their lores: Beast, Death, Fire, and Metal. New mounts here for White Lion Chariot for Alistair the White Lion, Arcane Phoenix for Teclis, and Griffin mount for both Prince and Princess. Prince and Princesses and Alistair no longer gain martial prowess when mounted on a Great Eagle, though. Princesses and Handmaidens can now fire on the move in a 360-degree arc when on foot. Noble Great Eagle mount increased by from 400 to 550, so a 150 point increase, because what was happening is anytime you would take a noble, you'd slap them on a Great Eagle if you wanted a very specific kind of goon squad. So this has kind of been retooled and retweaked here, making it a little bit harder to get that double noble spam with the Great Eagle mount. Tyrion replaced martial prowess with martial mastery. Finally, White Lions of Trace have had a bit of a tweaking as well. A nice increase to their HP by 2 per entity. So when you see this, just know that, guys, if it's not just saying that it got 2 more hit points, it's per entity. So your entities won't fall away as fast. Increased melee defense from 24 to 28, and decreased charge bonus from 22 to 18. I didn't think that was that drastic. I don't think they needed to tweak that part. Same thing applied to the pure main company as well. Illian Reavers had a cost decreased from 750 to 700, which is great. I think they're one of the best skirmish cav units in the game. This applies over to the Heralds, who also got a nice increase to their melee defense by 2. Now for the Lizardmen, they've gotten a tweak to the Ripperdactyls, which get a melee defense increase to 23. Norsca got some tweakings to their Frostworms and their Skinwolves, with some melee attack bonuses on the Frostworm from 44 to 45, and 1 for the melee defense as well. And then the Skinwolf Werekin got a reduction in their cost from 1200 to 1150, and the War Mammoth is now 2100, so about a 100 point reduction there. And also the War Shrine gained in Courage, which is quite nice. Now for Skaven, we get an increase in melee defense, by 1 for all the Plague Monk units here. The Storm Vermin also get a melee attack increase by 2 for all of the Storm Vermin units, all the way down even to the Council Guard. Poison Wind Mortar effect, which is pretty interesting here. So Poison Wind contact effect, max number of entities lowered from 32 to 28. Which is nice because the Poison Wind Mortars were very strong right now. They were able to do so much damage prior to this because it could apply to so many entities within a unit. This has now been reduced by 4, so it should hopefully kind of scale that damage back just a little bit without being too devastating, because you're not reducing the actual amount of poison damage that is constantly being affected, because remember, the Poison Wind Mortar delivers a damage over time ability. We're not reducing that number, and we're not reducing the overall damage. We're just saying, hey, less entities can take this damage at a time, which I'm a little bit more on board for. But as a result too, accuracy was increased slightly. Tomb King's got some retooling here as well. Lich Priest now available for custom battle and campaign exclusive unit section. Nehekar and Warriors increased melee defense from 21 to 22. Necrosphinx had a drop in leadership by 5 that applies also to the Sphinx of Usef. The Necropolis Knights got a nice little retooling though. Increased base damage from 20 to 21, AP damage from 38 to 40, melee defense from 38 to 41, and decreased in cost by 50. So hopefully they'll be just a lot better of a unit now, a little bit stockier, a little bit more damage, and just more accessible from a from multiplayer standpoint. Vampire Coast, Bloated Corpse now has now new tilt that explains their ability, but they also get Terror, as we saw earlier. Rotting Prometheans had a cost reduction down to 1050. Deck Droppers as well, losing 50 points all the way into the handguns. And then the Salt Lord Settlers, which are the Regiment Renowned Deck Dropper Gunners, also losing those 50 points. Vampire counts here have an increase in melee defense for Vargeists, up by 1 point. Hex Wraiths also getting an increase in their melee defense. Then Terrorgeist gaining some melee attack by 10. Look at that. And then reduced anti-large from 35 to 25. So I guess it kind of balances out there. They've also increased cost by 50. Then Shogoi on Vampire Lord mounted on a Terrorgeist gets those same reductions and increases as well. Same thing with Destroy Shogoi Ghoul King. Now we're on to the Shogoi Ghoul King also had melee defense increase from 40 to 42. Okay. Then Warriors of Chaos, some tweaking here, now have their own unit category for Gore Beast Chariots. The Chaos Sorcerer Lord has had its leadership increased by 5. Chaos Trolls reduced in their points by 50. Hell Cannon got some nice additional health onto its artillery piece by 250, and accuracy was slightly increased, which that's ridiculous. That thing is like unnecessarily accurate. You could be behind a hill, it would curve over the hill, destroy your unit, and carry on to the next. So that's a little terrifying to me. Same thing with the Soul of Damnation here. The Demon Spew, which is the regiment renowned Forsaken, got an increase for melee interval from 3.6 to 4.3, so they'll attack a little bit slower, and decreased base melee damage from 46 to 44, and increased AP from 12 to 14. Now, what else have gotten an increase in the melee defense across the board for their Dryad units from 24 to 25, and a melee attack on their Treekin. So, jumping here into spells and abilities. So all projectile spell damage has been, I guess the way they've kind of named it here is more reliable. You're going to see more damage from a lot of things that people weren't really using in the past. Arrows of Akshu are pretty well used. But Soul Quench is something that people weren't really using very much because it just wasn't really doing the damage it's supposed to do. And what was happening was that basically you had like these weird cascading rules of different times on things. I guess now what they're saying is that at short ranges, it'll do more damage and you have a moderate size increase to the actual projectile itself. So it has a chance to hit a little bit easier too. So summoning spells RA capacity will no longer be limited if you have a 20 unit cap. So if you have 20 units in your army, a full stack as it were, and you go to summon, it will no longer bar that summon. Quick battle MP Winds of Magic change. So in the past, anytime you did a quick battle, it would just use the same system as campaign. Now everyone always starts at 15 Winds of Magic, no matter what. So a nice little tweak there. Flesh to Stone had some rebalancing here. Wind Blast, Overcast AP damage reduced from 5 to 4. Here's probably one of the bigger ones on this list, though. Occam's Mind Razor, Winds of Magic cost reduced from 10 to 9 and overcasted from 18 to 16. Occam's Mind Razor is already a really strong ability, and it can be really comboed well. And now it's even more deadly, in my opinion. Warp Lightning, again, 6 to 5 meters in their damage radius here. Transformation of Cadon, which is a very popular spell in the competitive realm, just had its cost increase from 13 to 14, making it a little bit harder to constantly cast throughout the game. Vermintide also has a number of uses reduced from 6 to 5. So, Savage Dominion, Summon Cygor stable binding duration increased from 66 to 72. So your Cygor will last a little bit longer on the battlefield. As a result, though, you can't summon as many because it's just gotten a 3-point increase in its Winds of Magic cost. But we do have some other little tweaking here to some existing abilities on the other characters. Sort of techless, old effects removed, and now grants 20 Winds of Magic reserve and 0.3 regen. In the past, of course, it increased your damage. It's not that way anymore. Some of the bigger ones on this list, though, Boris Todbringer's Crush the Weak lowered rarity from rare to uncommon and -4 leadership effect removed. So go ahead and take a look through some of these. And so the Proving Grounds beta changes, I'll be honest, looking through this, a lot of these weren't the best parts of the Proving Grounds to be brought into the main patch. It's for those of you who don't know, Proving Grounds was a beta patch that they did earlier this year, and one of the biggest things of it was that it removed supply lines. This has not been put into effect. It is not here on this list. But the auto-resolve benefits are auto-resolve are a specific system to ensure unit losses disabled. Units are generally less likely to be killed in auto-resolve now, which is great. Auto-resolver bonus against minor factions adjusted for greenskins, dark elves, Skaven, and vampires. So, and I believe this applies to the time, anytime you go into a battle with a Skaven, your balance of power bar is always super inflated against the Skaven. So hopefully this has fixed that. For the most part, though, it's mainly a tweak to how the AI reacts and how they kind of conquer or do things on the Mortal Empires map and so on and so forth. Then lastly, diplomacy changes where vampire counts start at war with Stirlin. Schwarzhofen starts at war with Averland, removed war between Eataine, Kothic, and Kothic and Mortal Empires, and reduced Confederation likeliness for greenskins through diplomacy, as they have the Norska-style Confederation option now. So plenty of sweeping changes. This is a massive patch that not just covers the greenskins and the high elves, but also a massive amount of retweaking to all of the balance changes, with, I would say, the dark elves getting a pretty sizable nerf in a lot of their big heavy hitting units, and a lot of tweaking to a lot of the greenskins units becoming a lot more durable. So go ahead, guys, let me know in the comment section below what you're really enjoying about this patch and all of this content coming up to our eventual launch in 2 more days. We're going to be we've got one more video to cover on the launch that we're going to do for Ground the Paunch, is it right for you type campaign. That's going to be out here tomorrow, the day before launch, so at least you guys can know before jumping into the launch of the Warden and the Paunch. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. I know this is a pretty long patch notes video because this is super dense, but there was a lot of information to cover here today, and hopefully you get a chance to skim through it. I'll go ahead and put this in the description, so if you want to watch or want to go through these yourself, you're more than happy to. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. Have a good one and take care.